After the SAT, I confessed my feelings to my straight male classmate. But he rejected me. So I deleted all his contact information and vanished completely. In university, I worked part-time as a waiter at a nightclub. That evening, I unexpectedly bumped into Dylan partying with his crew. I ducked my head, mentally begging he wouldn't spot me. Dylan lost their game. And the penalty was kissing any guy there for 60 seconds. Right as I tried sneaking out, he suddenly pulled me over and planted one on me without hesitation. His gaze burned into mine as he growled, "Dare to act like strangers again?" Running into Dylan here was the last thing I expected. Stunned, I steeled myself to bring drinks to their booth. In the murky club lighting, I hoped desperately he wouldn't place me. An icy sensation crept up my spine. Someone's stare was glued to my every move. Dylan's group was playing a guessing game, with penalties for whoever lost. After delivering their order, I started heading out. When Dylan's loss was announced, his friends began whooping. Our golden boy actually slipped up. "Come on, pick here. This is gonna be good." From my peripheral vision, I peeked at the imposing figure lounging in the shadows. Dylan appeared totally unbothered. He slipped his hand into the penalty box and carefully extracted a slip of paper. Everyone pressed closer with curiosity once they read it. Awkward glances flew around the group. The vibe shifted uncomfortably. Despite the low lighting, my excellent eyesight caught what was written. "Make out with any male here for 60 seconds. My breath caught. Everyone knew Dylan was intensely anti-gay. A local troublemaker once hurled slurs at him and got pummeled unconscious. I had to call paramedics to scrape the guy off the pavement. Nobody was suicidal enough to lock lips with Dylan. His buddies tried laughing it off. "Maybe we should just do shots instead." I shifted toward the exit. Then Dylan's voice cut through the noise. "Not necessary." Instantly, strong fingers clamped around my forearm and held me backward. The sudden momentum sent me tumbling onto his thighs. Before my brain could process anything, Dylan's mouth crashed down on mine. My eyes went huge as I shoved against his chest, desperately trying to break free. This only triggered a more aggressive assault. The entire group sat frozen in disbelief. "Tell me I'm hallucinating. Dylan's actually making out with a dude." Somebody slapped me. Ouch. Why so hard? The kiss dragged on until my lungs screamed for air. Dylan finally pulled back with obvious reluctance. Both of us were breathing hard. His intense stare pinned me as he snarled, "Try ignoring me again, Jamie." Reality crashed back, and I launched myself off his lap, bolting for the restroom. My reflection showed crimson cheeks and puffy lips. My pulse hammered wildly. Cold water on my face helped clear the fog in my head. Dylan and I had shared a desk, and I'd nursed a crush for 3 solid years. At our graduation bash, I cracked and confessed, only to get shot down hard. "Jamie, could you try being normal? Crushing on guys is seriously gross." His brutal words sobered me instantly, and I fled. Back home, I purged every trace of Dylan from my phone and social media. Next morning, I relocated with my family for Dad's work transfer, vanishing without a trace. Somehow we both wound up at the same college. During freshman orientation, Dylan delivered the welcome address, sharp-suited in midnight black. His features were carved perfection with laser-focused eyes. His smile carried that signature devil-may-care edge. Every eye in the auditorium locked onto him. Girls in the audience lost their minds. Holy hell, look at him. Nothing new there. Dylan's high school locker overflowed with love notes from admirers. Constantly, people pumped me for intel about his type and dating preferences. Luckily, our academic paths diverged. I studied creative writing while Dylan tackled engineering. Our class building sat on opposite ends of campus. When I did spot him around, I'd always detour. Never imagined crossing paths at my workplace. Replaying that scorching kiss, my nails bit into my palms as my thoughts spiraled chaotically. Dylan's intentions remained a complete mystery. Dylan had tracked me down, trapped me against the wall, his penetrating gaze swimming with unreadable emotions. One thing was crystal clear. He was furious. Why ghost me completely then? Disappear? Real classy move, Amy. My mouth stayed sealed, words failing me entirely. As Dylan's hand moved toward me, I jerked backward reflexively. He froze mid-motion and asked quietly, "Am I really that repulsive to you?" Summoning my nerve, I met his stare head-on. What was that kiss supposed to mean? Dylan's silence stretched endlessly. Just wishful thinking on my part. Again, I let out a hollow laugh. I sidestepped him toward the door. Dylan's fingers circled my wrist. "Hold up. I need to." Before he could finish, I drove my knee upward forcefully. My aim went sideways and caught him right in the family jewels. Dylan's agonized grunt filled the space as he released me instantly. His murderous glare promised violence while his face contorted in pain. "Jamie, you're really pushing it." I scrambled backwards several feet, maintaining safe distance. Crap, was Dylan about to pummel me? His martial arts training, meant my scrawny build would crumble with one hit. Get over here, Dylan commanded through clenched teeth. Hell no. I'm not that stupid. I bolted without a backward glance. But club sat just blocks from our university. I didn't stop running until I reached my dorm room safely. My roommate ribbed me. What's the rush? Did something spook you? Internally, I groaned. Dylan's way scarier than any monster. Cutting my shift short, I sent my manager an apologetic text. His quick response included a heads up. Jamie kiddo, you ticked someone off? Some gorgeous guy was fishing for info about you. But I kept quiet. Dylan immediately came to mind. Still holding grudges like always. Getting cornered by him would spell disaster. Worried Dylan might camp outside the club, I requested several days off to avoid detection. My hunch proved accurate. My manager confirmed Dylan had been haunting the place nightly. Learning about my absence left him looking thunderous. Those days passed in constant anxiety, even grabbing meals to go from the dining hall, petrified of accidentally encountering Dylan. But fate loves cruel irony. After class ended, sudden commotion erupted in the hallway. He's even more stunning in person. I gathered my materials and stood to leave. A towering shadow fell across me, followed by a menacing chuckle. Gotcha. My head snapped up. Dylan loomed directly overhead. I clutched my backpack like a shield, going full defensive mode. What's your game plan? Early Dylan wouldn't try anything. With witnesses and security cameras everywhere. My roommate wandered over with interest. Joe, you're tight with the campus god. Dylan beat me to responding. Jamie and I go way back. Shared a desk through high school. Hope you guys look out for him. Dinner's on me next time. My roommate's jaw dropped before he grinned widely. Jamie's our dorm mascot. No worries, man. We've got his back completely. They swapped numbers right there in front of me. My roommate split for his next commitment. Dylan's eyes narrowed as his lips curved dangerously. Walk out with me peacefully. Or do I need to throw you over my shoulder? Walk out with me peacefully. Or do I need to throw you over my shoulder? The threat wasn't an empty one. I knew Dylan well enough to recognize the dangerous tightening of his jaw. The few remaining students in the hallway were already throwing us curious glances, drawn by Dylan's undeniable gravitational pull. If he actually hoisted me over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, I'd be the subject of campus gossip by dinner time. Fine, I hissed, my knuckles turning white around my backpack straps. But keep your hands off me. Dylan's eyes flashed with a complicated mix of relief and lingering anger. Took a step back, gesturing toward the exit. Lead the way. We walked in suffocating silence. I kept a solid 3 feet between us, my mind racing for escape routes. The air around him felt charged, smelling faintly of cedar and spearmint, a scent that immediately dragged me back to countless hours. Sharing a desk, stealing glances at his profile while he aggressively erased math equations. He didn't lead me to a dorm. Instead, we headed to the edge of the student parking lot, stopping in front of a sleek matte black Audi. He unlocked it with a sharp chirp. Get in. I'm not getting in a car with you, I said, planting my feet. You want to yell at me? Do it here. I'm not letting you drive me to a second location so you can bury me in the woods for kneeing you in the junk. A startling, ragged laugh tore from his throat. He leaned against the roof of the car, staring at me across the metal. I'm not going to murder you, Jamie. Though God knows I thought about it the past few days. Just get in. We need to talk, and I'm not doing it where half the engineering department can hear us. Against my better judgment, I slid into the passenger seat. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing us in a quiet bubble. Dylan dropped into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel but making no move to start the engine. The silence stretched until it felt like the oxygen was thinning. 3 years, Dylan finally said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the arrogant edge from the hallway. You completely wiped your existence from my life for 3 years. Disconnected your number. Deleted all your socials. I went to your house the day after the party, and there was a damn for sale sign on the lawn. I stared straight out the windshield. My dad got a transfer. It was planned months in advance. But you didn't tell me. He turned his head, his gaze burning into the side of my face. You didn't tell your best friend you were moving across the country. You weren't my best friend anymore. I snapped, the old bitter wound ripping open before I could stop it. I whipped my head to face him, my chest heaving. Did you forget what you said to me? Crushing on guys is seriously gross. Could you try being normal? What was I supposed to do, Dylan? Stick around and help. You pack your bags while you looked at me like I was some kind of diseased freak. Dylan flinched. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a pale, hollowed-out expression. He let go of the steering wheel and rubbed his hands roughly over his face. I was an idiot, he whispered into his palms. Wow. Great apology. Truly groundbreaking. I reached for the door handle. If that's all, I have an essay to write. Lock the doors, Dylan commanded the car's voice system. The locks clicked down. Instantly. Hey, just listen to me, Dylan practically shouted, his hands dropping. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. Just give me 5 minutes, please. I froze. Dylan didn't beg. He was the golden boy, the untouchable god who took what he wanted and laughed off the rest. Seeing him look this panicked, this utterly wrecked, paralyzed me. That night, when you told me, Dylan started, his voice grating as if fighting its way up his throat. I panicked. I grew up with a dad who used slurs at the dinner table like they were punctuation. I spent my whole life building this perfect, untouchable, hypermasculine image because I thought that was the only way to survive. Then you, the only person I actually gave a shit about, looked at me with those eyes, and my brain short-circuited. He leaned closer over the console, his dark eyes pleading. I wasn't grossed out by you, Jamie. I was terrified of myself. The moment you ran out of that party, I felt like someone had ripped my lungs out. I stayed up all night staring at my ceiling, realizing I had just destroyed the best thing in my life because I was a coward. I swallowed hard, my throat aching. And the guy you put in the hospital? The troublemaker? Dylan grimaced. He didn't hurl slurs at me. He hurled them at you. He saw you crying when you left the party. He started making disgusting jokes about you. I lost my mind. I didn't even realize what I was doing until the cops pulled me off him. My breath hitched. The entire school thought Dylan had beaten the guy up out of homophobic rage. He was defending me? When I went to your house the next morning to grovel, to tell you I didn't care what my dad or anyone else thought, you were gone, Dylan continued, his voice cracking. Do you know what it's like to spend 3 years looking for a ghost? Every time I saw a guy with your build, or heard a laugh that sounded like yours, my heart would stop. Then I go to a random club, pull a stupid penalty, slip, kiss the waiter, and he tastes exactly like the kid I've been dreaming about for 3 years. Stop, I whispered, pressing my hands over my ears. Just stop. You can't just dump this on me. You don't get to erase 3 years of me feeling like absolute garbage just because you finally grew a conscience. Dylan gently reached out, wrapping his warm fingers around my wrists and pulling my hands down. I'm not trying to erase it. I'm trying to fix it. I'm giving you all the power, Jamie. I'm at your mercy. He offered a weak, self-deprecating smirk. You already kicked the absolute shit out of me. My pride is gone. A reluctant, breathy laugh escaped me before I could suppress it. There it is, Dylan murmured, his thumb brushing over my pulse point. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for a chance to start over. Let me court you. Let me prove I'm not that scared 18-year-old punk anymore. I looked down at his large hand holding mine. The protective walls I'd spent years building were trembling. But I wasn't going to surrender easily. If you try to pull some possessive alpha male garbage, I will knee you again. Harder. Understood. And if you get weird about people knowing. Jamie, Dylan interrupted smoothly, his gaze turning fiercely determined. I will buy a billboard on the quad if it makes you believe me. True to his word, Dylan's approach to starting over was nothing short of relentless. He didn't buy a billboard, but he might as well have. It started small. A coffee from my favorite off-campus cafe waiting on my desk before my 8 a.m. creative writing lecture. I still had no idea how he figured out my schedule, though I strongly suspected Mark, my traitorous roommate, had been bribed with food. Then it escalated. One rainy Tuesday, I was standing under the awning of the Humanities building, dreading the sprint to the dining hall, when a large black umbrella materialized over my head. I looked over to see Dylan, looking infuriatingly handsome in a damp trench coat, holding it. Your chariot awaits, he said casually, taking my backpack from me before I could protest. You're an engineering major. Don't you have a thermodynamics lab right now? I asked, falling into step beside him. I finished early. Needed to check on my investment. He shot me a sideways grin that made my stomach do an embarrassing flip. Despite my reservations, slipping back into a rhythm with Dylan was frighteningly easy. We fell into our old high school banter, but there was a new electric undercurrent to everything we did. When we sat together in the dining hall, his thigh would deliberately press against mine. When I spoke, he gave me his undivided attention, staring at my mouth in a way that made me completely lose my train of thought. The real test came a month later. I was back working at the club. Dylan hated it, but he respected my boundary. When I told him I needed the money and the independence, his compromise was showing up every single Friday night, nursing a soda at a corner booth, acting as an extremely intimidating, unpaid security guard. That night, the club was packed. I was weaving through the crowd with a tray of drinks when a drunk patron grabbed my waist, yanking me against him. "Hey beautiful, why the rush?" The guy slurred, his breath reeking of cheap tequila. "Let go of me," I said coldly, trying to pry his thick fingers off my hip. "Just one drink." Before I could blink, a large hand clamped down on the drunk guy's shoulder. Dylan materialized out of the strobe lights, his face and mask of pure glacial fury. The muscles in his forearm flexed as he gripped the guy. "He said let go," Dylan said, his voice low enough to cut through the heavy bass of the music. The drunk guy turned, ready to fight, but stopped dead when he took in Dylan's height, the broad span of his shoulders, and the dead-eyed stare that promised a trip to the ER. The guy swallowed hard, raised his hands in surrender, and stumbled away into the crowd. I exhaled sharply, my adrenaline spiking. I looked at Dylan, expecting the possessive outburst I had feared. Instead, Dylan took a deep breath, visibly forcing the rage out of his posture. He turned to me, his eyes softening. Immediately. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" he asked, his hands hovering around me, refusing to touch me without permission. "I'm fine," I breathed, staring at him. He hadn't thrown a punch. He had controlled his temper for me. Dylan ran a hand through his hair. "I'm going to go step outside for a minute before I decide to track him down. Take your break soon. I'll buy you fries." As I watched him walk toward the exit, his broad shoulders tense, something in my chest finally clicked into place. The lingering fear from high school evaporated. This wasn't the boy who had rejected me out of panic. This was a man who was actively choosing me, prioritizing my safety and boundaries over his own ego. My shift ended at 2 a.m. The crisp night air bit into my cheeks as I walked out the back door. Dylan was leaning against his car, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, instantly pocketing the device. "Fries," he offered. "Actually," I said, walking slowly toward him, "I'm not really hungry." Dylan frowned slightly, stepping closer. "Everything all right? Was the rest of the shift bad?" I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed the lapels of his leather jacket and pulled him down. I kissed him. It wasn't a brutal, desperate collision like the penalty kiss in the club weeks ago. It was intentional, slow, and entirely mine. I felt Dylan freeze in sheer shock for a millisecond before his arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against his chest. He groaned into my mouth, taking control, parting my lips and kissing me with a starving intensity. His hands were greedy, mapping the lines of my back, tangling in my hair. The cold night air was completely forgotten, replaced by the blazing heat radiating between us. When we finally broke apart, both of us were panting. Dylan rested, his forehead against mine, his eyes tightly shut as if afraid this was a dream. "Jamie," he breathed. "You're off probation," I whispered. A slow, devastatingly brilliant smile spread across his face. He picked me up by the waist, spinning me around once before pinning me against the side of his car. To kiss me again, harder this time. "My place," he murmured against my lips. "Please." I nodded. His apartment was off campus, a modern, minimalist space that screamed Dylan. But I didn't get much time to look at the decor. The second the door clicked, locked behind us, Dylan had me backed against the wall. "I've been thinking about this for 3 years, he confessed, kissing the line of my jaw, his hands slipping under my shirt to feel the bare skin of my waist. "I thought I lost my chance forever." "You almost did," I gasped as he bit down gently on my neck. "You're lucky I have terrible taste in men." Dylan let out a low chuckle, lifting me easily. I wrapped my legs around his waist as he carried me toward the bedroom. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." That night was a revelation. Every touch, every word he whispered into my skin was a frantic apology and a fierce vow. He treated me like I was made of glass, but worshipped me with a rough, unrestrained passion that left me completely undone. By the time the morning sun began filtering through the blinds, we were tangled together in the sheets, exhausted and entirely at peace. I traced the muscular line of his chest as he slept, his arms slung heavily over my waist, pulling me close even in unconsciousness. I realized then that the kid who broke my heart was completely gone. The man holding me was mine. 1 year later, the campus theater was packed for the senior creative writing showcase. I stood backstage, nervously fiddling with the edges of my manuscript. My hands were shaking, writing my final project, a brutally honest, semi-autobiographical piece about rejection, disappearance, and the chaotic process of being found again, was one thing. Reading it in front of 200 people was another. "Hey." I turned. Dylan slipped past the heavy velvet curtains, wearing a tailored black button-down that made him look unfairly good. He ignored the stagehands telling him he wasn't supposed to be back here, and pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'm going to throw up," I mumbled into his shoulder. No, you're not, he said calmly, pressing a kiss to my temple. You're going to go out there, read your brilliant story, and everyone is going to realize what a genius you are. And then I'm taking you to that Italian place you love to celebrate. What if they hate it? Dylan pulled back, looking me dead in the eye. Jamie, you survived loving me when I was a complete jackass. You survived me hunting you down at a nightclub. You can survive reading a piece of paper to a bunch of undergrads. I let out a shaky laugh. Fair point. Jamie, you're up, the stage manager whispered, pointing to the podium. Dylan gave my hand one last squeeze. I'll be in the front row. I love you. I love you too. I walked out onto the stage. The spotlights were blinding, but as my eyes adjusted, I found him instantly, sitting dead center, in front of all his engineering frat brothers who had tagged along. Dylan sat with his eyes completely locked onto me. There was no hesitation, no hiding, no fear of who was watching. He looked at me with open, unashamed devotion. I took a deep breath, looked down at my pages, and began to read. Our story started with a painful fracture, a brutal collision of fear and running away. But as I read the final lines of my piece, looking back up into the dark, steady eyes of the boy who had crossed the country and flipped his entire world upside down just to find me again, I knew exactly how our story ended. Not with a vanished trace, but with a permanent anchor.